Hello, this is David Galena here. I am doing a presentation for a conference that Sarah Rappaport and I went to in July, end of July 2018. Title is in the left-hand corner of this website right here, Movement, Brain, Body, Cognition. So they've took down the website for this previous concert. I have a couple other tabs open that I'm going to be showing you. Was the second annual one. The first was in Oxford the year before, and this upcoming one, as of the time of this recording, is next year, next July in Tel Aviv. So this conference is quite a thing. This is a collection of experiential workshops and dancers with academic researchers, with clinicians. So you have this full spectrum exploring the idea of movement and cognition. So to give kind of an idea of the range of things here, this was one of the presentations, or more so one of the performances that was given at the event this year. So I'm just gonna play this little quick introduction here.
Welcome to Feedback, a biofeedback live performance.
So we actually met the whole team of people, the choreographer, the three dancers, and the psychiatrist, who were all part of this. It's gonna play again. This group, they're doing a dance performance based on biofeedback. So what you were seeing in the video, there's a part towards the end here where they would pick someone from the audience. So this person here, and the psychologist would she's hooked up to a bunch of sensors right now. You can see some of the sensors here, and there were three screens measuring things that you would see in Dr. Brad's mind body class. So some basic biofeedback. There's the heart rate variability, the pulse, and the sweat activity, I believe, for the three. And those were posted on big screens. So both her and the psychologist, who's explaining what's going on to her, and as she reacts to certain things, the screens react with different information. And based on that, the dancers would interpret or move inspired by that. So yeah, it was this very interesting interplay between the audience, she being a member of the audience, and the audience can see the screens as well as they can see her and the dancers in between. It was a very unique thing. They just premiered this in New York City, and this was, again, this conference was held in Boston. So that was one end of the spectrum, was this performance component to it. Let's think of like the other end, the academic end, before we get to some of the clinical stuff. So Jerry Leisman, I actually met him through the functional neurology world. He's very well published. If you look up his name right here, he's also the founder of this conference. So this was a paper that he wrote that kind of summarizes, I would say this summarizes the thesis of the whole thing. So I'll just read the abstract here. So in this article, we argue that the motor and cognitive processes are not separate, but most likely share similar evolutionary history. This is supported by clinical and neural data showing that some brain regions play a similar function in both motor and cognitive functions. In addition, we argue that cognitive processes play a role for the generation of complex motor output, which is supported by the data from patients with stroke and Parkinson's disease. Further, we review data that motor processes can contribute to cognitive function, as found by many training programs. Thus, motor and cognitive processes have dynamical, bidirectional relationships, which we explain in this article. So, what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you a few snippets of things. I have a book that they handed out that is 230 pages. Out of each page in the book is a single abstract from either research, presentation, workshop, something. So 230 things to look into that you're just getting a glimpse of. I'm going to give you maybe 10 in this presentation. If you want the schedule or the names or more information, you can email me. Here's my email, david.galina@bastyr.edu. This was the presentation that I gave. This is a workshop presentation that I did at this conference. This was the same presentation I did at the International Association of Functional Neurology and Rehabilitation in November 2017. So I'll show you some of my slides and share some of my information. Again, this is this connection between the brain and the body, that they're really the same thing. It's what Jerry Leisman is saying in this presentation here. Motor processes can contribute to cognitive functions, as found in many training programs. And we know this. We know just going for a walk or exercising or dancing, these things significantly affect the way you think. That there's no shortage, or there's no secret of the immense amount of benefits that exercise has on our physiology and well-being and disease risk and really everything. So let's look a little bit more at this, because if you're going to read one paper, I would read this one, or at least read more of the introduction. So I just want to go a little bit more into this before I go into another area. So this is free online. You can see this: thinking, walking, talking, the development of the integratory brain function. If you just type in a few of those keywords, it'll show up. If you don't want to type it in exactly, the whole thing is free online. In an attempt to better understand the relationship between motor and cognitive functions and the reason for their linkage, it is important to note that in humans, bipedalism was a major reason for human neocortical evolution. As bipedal locomotion is phylogenetically the most sophisticated and complex movement and characteristically human, even though birds on the ground, some mammals and primates possess that function as well, humans are dedicated to this mode of locomotion. So this article is going to go on to further point out some things that we don't see every time we see a disease that involves the brain, that involves some sort of movement disorder. There's almost always a cognitive aspect to it. Every time we see so for example, in that Parkinson's disease, so you have tremors, you have stiffness of movement, the cogwheel rigidity. It also has often a mental component. There's a lot more risk for depression or slower thinking or less adaptive problem solving. And then the other way, things we think of as cerebral deficits or cognitive disabilities like cerebral palsy also have a motor component. So these things are inextricably linked as we grow, as we evolve from infants to toddlers throughout our childhood. Our motor activities and cognitive abilities are hand in hand. So the whole can really separate these things. So there exists an overlap of cognitive and motor functions based on the articulation of the cerebellum, basal ganglia, and frontal lobes, which are brain areas known to control both motor and non-motor, intentional, and executive function. Most developmental disabilities have their most common symptom, motor incoordination or clumsiness, especially of posture and gait. Impulse control, either inhibited or facilitated, and judgment disorders can all be attributed to dysfunction of this network and its control of motor and non-motor behavior. The spectrum of the disorders all involve disruption primarily of what is known as executive processes, which are functions attributed to the frontal lobe. So, I'm tempted just to keep reading with this, but for the sake of your time, if your interest is piqued here, please continue and send me an email. I'd love to talk about it sometime. From the clinical side of things, this is Robert Melillo, who's also a functional neurologist. His book is his most popular book, Disconnected Kids. So it's going to be kind of a behavioral intervention for kids with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, other neurological conditions. It can be some very simple things of combining different vestibular stimulation with different eye movements, with different cognitive tasks, different balance exercises, all of these things specifically to activate the parts of the brain that aren't being activated. So I highly recommend his book here. He did a presentation on this topic, the importance of movement for learning, as well as autonomic development and the brainstem, which again, it's too much to go into here, but he has more resources online. He has his own course that I know is popular with the Bastyr San Diego crowd on primitive reflexes and functional neurology for learning disabilities, kids with learning disabilities. So here's this website here. Again, for the sake of time, you can always just pause the screen here if you would like to read this little bit and continue. The importance of play being something that all animals do, something that we need as well. And that never goes away, except we stop doing it as we grow older. So let's jump to a completely different topic. This was someone we met there who also presented some work. She lives in Amsterdam, and this was her presentation right here. So Awake, Adapt, Evolve, research project on site-specific performances on movement adaptability and neuroplasticity. There are additional resources right here if you are interested in this sort of topic. To summarize, what we learned from her work was how it was very sociological, so how people react to seeing movement that is different in public. I wouldn't call it like overt dancing or anything, but it was enough to make people either ignore what's going on. People might be totally oblivious. Some people were very nervous about what was going on, so they would see these little mini demonstrations. I don't really want to call them performances, and they would like move away or grab their bags. Some people would be very interested and kind of like front row, edge of their seat, looking at them, and there are people who would get angry. It is very strange. So this different reactions to watching people move. So we have more information about her right here. Mike Studer, I hope I'm saying his name correctly. This was a physical therapist out of Portland. So he did his presentation on something that's very fascinating, dual task intensity. So dual tasking coupled with exercise. So I've never seen this done before. We see high intensity interval training as an area of a lot of research in the exercise world, things where a 7 to 20 minute workout of doing really high intensity, very 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 stressful um, work, and then resting in between and going back and forth. And then we have mental cognitive tasks that we see a lot in the neurological rehab world. So this was a combination of doing high intensity physical activity and then quickly going to demanding cognitive activity, doing often dual tasking sort of things. So having some sort of answering questions while stepping in a certain pattern on the ground. He has some videos on YouTube if you want to see some of the work that he does. So this is his name here. You can plug him into YouTube. This is his website. And again, he's in Portland. We're in contact with him about, I apologize for these messages in the corner. I can't turn them off. We're in contact with him about doing preceptoring work. So he has some of his webinars coming up on this topic, especially if you're interested in the neurology world and or physical medicine world. So of course it's webinars here if you're looking for more information. Very nice person. He would be happy to help you if you get in contact with him for students. Here's his email up here in the corner. Peter Payne, Dr. Peter Payne, excuse me. Somatic experiencing using interoception and proprioception as core elements of trauma therapy. He has a lot of research. This was a professor at, still is a professor at Dartmouth College. Let's go over just a little bit of his work here. Before I do this, I'm seeing if I can even continue to mentally organize some of the areas. So far we've looked at dance performances. We've looked at the very academic world of evolutionary integratory brain function and development. We have Dr. Melillo on the clinical side of these behavioral interventions. Mike Studer was doing the physical therapy, but very heavy in the neurology world, and then a couple other like main worlds. There was a lot of yoga. I personally did not have very much interest in going to see that. I know that there's a lot of research on yoga. I was more interested in the research on dance because I think it's more promising overall. So there was dance for Parkinson's disease, dance for Alzheimer's disease, dance for MS. There were separate presentations on all of these. I can give you the information on them. It was very very exciting, very promising. So if you think about what dance is, there's so many components to it beyond exercise. There's the movement complexity component. There's the learning component, and there's the creative, expressive component. There's the social component. Yeah, it's very empowering. So it's definitely in tears watching. Those people discuss their experience getting Parkinson's disease and starting to go to these Parkinson's specific dance classes. So yoga world, dance world, and then the somatic world, which we'll define somatic as, I don't really like the word mindfulness. I'll say more body awareness or mental awareness. Awareness of what's going on in your brain, awareness of how things feel. So somatic experiencing is using that. Let me use their words to explain it better. Here we present a theory of human trauma and chronic stress based on the practice of somatic experiencing, a form of trauma therapy that emphasizes guiding the client's attention to interoceptive, kinesthetic, and proprioceptive experience. Somatic experiencing claims that this style of inner attention, in the addition to the use of kinesthetic and interoceptive imagery, can lead to the resolution of symptoms resulting from chronic and traumatic stress. This is accomplished through the completion of thwarted, biologically based, self protective and defensive mechanisms, and the discharge and regulation of excess autonomic arousal. So I interpret that as chronic stress, chronic sympathetic overdrive. You're always in fight or flight. We present this theory through a composite case study of somatic experiencing treatment. Based on this example, we offer a possible neurophysiological rationale for the mechanisms involved, including a theory of trauma and chronic stress as a function of dysregulation of the complex dynamical systems formed by subcortical autonomic, limbic, motor, and arousal systems, which we term the core response network. We demonstrate how the methods of somatic experiencing help restore functionality to the core response network, and we emphasize the importance of taking into account the instinctive, bodily-based protective reactions when dealing with stress and trauma, as well as the effectiveness of using attention to interoceptive, proprioceptive, and kinesthetic sensation as a therapeutic tool. Finally, we point out that the somatic experiencing and similar somatic approaches offer a supplement to cognitive and exposure therapies, and that the mechanisms similar to those discussed in the paper may also be involved in the benefits of meditation and other somatic practices. So overlap between the benefits of meditation and things of this somatic awareness practice. You'll find these, another very common one that people should look into that was presented. There were many Feldenkrais practitioners for this body awareness. This is something to look into. All right, let's bounce back to the academic world for a minute. So from the somatic clinical intervention world, and this is less clinical applications, but Stephen Grossberg was a keynote speaker. He opened up the conference with his developing the adaptive resonance theory, how a brain learns to consciously attend, learn, and recognize a changing world. So in order to get more information in here, you can pause and read this abstract, and if your interest is piqued, he is very well published. You'll notice in this paper, in a lot of his papers, he references his own work from the 70s and 80s. So this has been built over a lifetime worth of work. To be honest, personally, it was very hard to follow and understand. So I feel like I needed a little bit more background information on this. So rather than looking at his most current research and updates to the theory, maybe going back a couple decades to catch up. Let's bounce to another world. This was the constellation points method by John Ottman, who's a contemporary ballet dance teacher out of Toronto. So last I talked to him, he's in the process of getting his website up, but he has given me permission to share some of his information with his slides. So I just want to go over a few points here. This is back to the dance experiential world. If I'm going to summarize what the constellation points method is, it's based on star constellations is the idea, but we're going to use this in terms of our body and our current environment. So if we'll use dance as an example, but really can be walking. This is another crossover. This is a somatic technique being applied to dance. This is a somatic technique with the goal being increasing awareness. He recommends by starting with one of the 6 major joints, so wrist, elbow, shoulder, or hip, knee, ankle. Picking one of those joints on one side. He recommends actually touching it and grabbing it so you can feel it. And then as you walk or as you dance or as you perform whatever you're doing, even if it's remaining still, having extra awareness of that point. So that's point number one. From there, you can continue to increase in complexity. You can pick maybe your left elbow and your right knee. And as you walk or as you dance or as you perform some sort of movement or stillness activity, you're providing extra attention there. And when you have 2 points, he recommends being aware of the relationship to them. So not necessarily attracting them or opposing them, just being aware of how they fit together. So sometimes you will bring them closer together. Sometimes they will go further apart. And as you noticed, now you have kind of a line between 2 of your joints. This is a lot of work. This is a lot of work for the brain to stay focused during all of this. If we're going to continue increasing in complexity, which I believe is the goal of this and the goal of this awareness building, you can start to pick points in the room. So if we're going to stick with one of our elbows and our knee, maybe I pick the top corner of the room, and now I have what looks like an ever-changing constellation. Every time I move, the relationship between these 3 points are also moving, just like the constellation only looks static from one perspective. As soon as the perspective changes, everything appears to move. This can be increased to the point where you're moving beyond the 6 major joints of the body. Maybe you're using a very particular point on your torso or a very particular point on your head, using 1, 2, 3, 4 plus points, and using multiple points in the room. And you're constantly dividing your attention, splitting your attention, focusing on all of these things. And you'll notice this is very, very well reported. And in the videos in his presentation, he has his dancers explaining how much this changes the quality of the movement, which is a very, very interesting thing. This has applications to partnering, like partner dancing of any sort, where you can pick several points in your body and several points in their body, always being aware of what your points feel like and the relationship between each other and the partner's points that you've picked. And you can always add the environment, if your brain can work that much. So it's really an infinite practice, and I talked to a lot of dancers at this presentation. His work was some of the most interesting and inspiring that we've all continued practicing and looking into. So that's kind of the basics on the technique. Hopefully you can look more into it through the source, not hearing it secondhand through me. So here's some of his applications. There's the improvisation, creativity component, the interpretation. This can be used for creating choreography, the cognitive building, the education building, getting to know what your body feels like. I think there's a therapeutic component to this as well. Of the more you can understand what your body feels like, the more you can understand and relate to this pain. All right, so if you want to talk more about John Evans' work, I would love to do that. Please contact me. So here's my presentation, Novelty and Functional Neurological Prehabilitation. So prehab is a thing that a word I heard from the strength and conditioning world. So if I'm prehabbing my shoulder, I'm essentially doing rehab exercises like external rotation, strengthening exercises, but my shoulder isn't injured. I'm doing it, so I prehabilitate, so I try to make it more injury resistant. So this is the idea of applying this injury resistance or resistance to neurodegeneration to the brain. So I want a strong, vibrant brain that can take, a small TBI in worst case scenario, or it can take aging. A lot of people's brains can't handle aging, and it starts to degenerate very quickly. So I think we do that by doing a combination of movement and cognitive tasks, and always striving for novelty, for learning new things. The brain loves to learn new things. That's why we have it. We have the brain to do complex and adaptive abilities. So this whole thesis of the conference is something that I've been talking about ever since I've gotten into this movement world. And if you're interested in my movement background, I highly recommend looking up the Ido Portal method. I have some of his work on my website, davidgalina.com, and yeah, it'll give you some information on how to get started. There's a podcast where I talk about it. There's plenty of more information for you there. So, firmly believe that the majority of learning about movement should be experiential, and that we should be using creativity in our practice. This creativity, this learning new things, this whole idea of playing that Malila was talking about. This all makes us human. This all makes us to have good, healthy human brains. So the way I did my workshop, I would introduce a task that would have various progressions. So I want my movement tasks to be able to help someone who is recovering from a stroke. I want it to be helpful for the average person, and I want it to be helpful for an elite athlete. All levels, depending on how you scale the exercise in complexity. And once you do it, once you can do it well or well enough, start making it more complicated. So your brain is always having to adapt and learn new things. I tell everyone to make a note of what you suck at. If you're really bad at balance exercises, you should be working on balance exercises. If you can't catch a tennis ball, you should be working on catching a tennis ball. There's some basic brain functions, some basic movement things that we should be thinking about where we're missing. For all of these tasks, if you're balancing on one leg, you can always add more things. If I'm balancing on one leg, I can start giving you eye exercises. I can start giving you eye exercises and making you move your spine at the same time. I could always add some sensory stimulation to this to further stimulate and activate the brain. If this is a movement task, I can start adding cognitive tasks to my movement tasks. So I think I added that last minute after seeing Mike Studer's presentation. And when you're resting in movement or resting from exercise, to get off the cell phone. This is a great time to go back to this somatic world of knowing what your body feels like and making that a skill that you practice, not mindlessly tuning out and going into brain world and flipping through email and social media. So, for Bastyr students, I will give you all of the material that I presented if you email me. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, I have the 230-page movement cognition book from Harvard. It has all of these abstracts. There's, I probably touched on 10% of the material at this conference. I'm trying to give a good representation of the vast variety of material there. It was 3 days long, and during any 1 hour time slot, there was probably about 9 options for most of them. So, multiply that up. We saw a small amount of everything that was to be offered, and we were jam-packed and overwhelmed already. So I hope I've given you a little bit of experience of that overwhelmed feeling and piqued your interest on one topic in this wide world of movement and cognition. So this idea that we can separate our mind and body is not real. That they're connected. Why do we have to say that they're connected? If we say that, it implies that we can disconnect them, but they're always going to be connected. So our movement equals our quality of thought, which equals our quality of life. They're all the same thing. Which is the theme of my work here. It's the theme of the whole conference, and I hope I've given you something to think about. Thanks for listening, and hope to hear from you soon.